Yo, what's going on, people? Indypride here, and if you've been living under a rock, you might have missed Creative Assembly's announcement that Brettonia is coming in February of 2017. That's certainly later than expected. On the previous free DLC schedule, looked like we'd be getting them around November or December of this year, but they have been delayed, so that they could get some extra love and attention, and because they'll be launching alongside the Old World Edition, which will be a repackaged Total War Warhammer with an exclusive novella called The Prince of Altdorf. I couldn't care less about this new version of the game. If it drives more sales for Total War, that's great, but there's really not much to cover on that front because they're not repackaging new content into it or adding DLC. So I'm not jumping with joy about the delay, but if they're going to be getting extra love and attention, I'm all for it, and it's free anyway, so it's kind of hard to complain about free additions to the game. CA already confirmed that we would be getting a new DLC that is quote-unquote growing before Christmas, and considering the fact that they typically go radio silent for about 3 to 4 weeks around Christmas time, I'm expecting Wood Elves in early December at the very latest, but of course we've been coming up with theories and ideas about when they'll be launching for many weeks now, so I don't really know, but because of that radio silence that we normally see around Christmas, I do expect to see them very soon. I wouldn't be remotely surprised to see an announcement that comes this week with an official launch 2 weeks later on December 29th or November 29th or on December 1st. We'll find out soon enough, of course, but CA literally will not be in the office for a good chunk of December, so it's got to be early on in December. We're not going to be seeing it like December 20th or anything like that. Now, if you guys remember, I did call back in December of 2015 that Brettonia would be the free DLC race, so I'll take my props. I made a video about it with some Call of Warhammer gameplay, and honestly though, we've known that they'd be free for a while now, but this was the official big announcement from CA, so if anyone was still doubting that for some reason, you no longer have any cause to. They'll be launching with 3 legendary lords, King Lewin of course, the Fey Enchantress, which I think most people were expecting would be the 2nd legendary lord, but an interesting 3rd choice has been chosen by the lady, Alberic of Bordelot, the current Duke of, you guessed it, Bordelot. This is definitely a somewhat strange selection. He's not a named character in the most recent Brettonian army book. In fact, he was literally never a tabletop character or in any of the Brettonian army books, period. He has never been a playable character in a tabletop game. So why did Creative Assembly pick him? Well, the answer is probably because of his starting location. There's nothing incredibly interesting about starting in Bordelot instead of Cologne, because frankly, all the Brettonian cities are relatively close together, but it still adds a little bit of nice variety and flavor to the campaign. You will have some different threats to deal with. I mean, you'll be starting to the south of Mousillon, so you'll be dealing with Astalia and Talea and Kazrak's Bray Herd, while Caron and Lewin up top are dealing with Varg and scaling naval raids and the Empire to the east. Bordelot itself is home to the largest port in Bretonnia and is built on the ancient ruins of a high elf settlement, so it might be a pretty interesting starting position. It's not crazy different because, again, Bretonnia is relatively close together, but you will be facing some different threats. There isn't that much information on Alberic, so CA will have a lot of leeway in how they build the character, and that was actually probably a deciding factor on why they picked him. It's definitely a significant departure from what they've done with previous legendary lords up to this point, so I'm interested to see how they decide to handle him, but what we do know is that Alberic is the Duke of Bordelot, that he is not a Grail Knight like Lewin, he's just a Knight of the Realm because he was busy ruling and did not embark on a Grail quest, and he has extremely high standards for the Knights of his household. He is renowned throughout the kingdom for his self-discipline and courage, and any Knights that make up his personal retinue need to live up to that standard, or they get dismissed. As a result, he has some of the best Knights in all of Bretonnia at his command, but also the smallest household of any of the dukes. He's also getting a bit old. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him, but at this point, I bet you guys are wondering about the Green Knight, because I definitely was. So real quick, the Green Knight was actually the founder of Bretonnia thousands of years ago, and he comes back in spirit form as the guardian of the Lady of the Lake. He basically shows up to help turn the tide for Bretonnia in battles that seem lost, and he is also the champion that questing knights have to best in combat to drink from the Grail. He's basically already been confirmed by Darren on Reddit, but what we don't know is in what capacity he will be included. Darren did say on Reddit we would find out more about him after Christmas though. There are a few options here. He could just be a 4th Legendary Lord. At this point, we know CA has the flexibility to make anyone within a faction a Lord character, and they could just be teasing and holding off for that announcement. He is literally the White Dwarf's equivalent for Bretonnia, and we know that Grombrindal got Legendary Lord treatment, so it's definitely a possibility. He could be the next White Dwarf free character, where you have to get a copy of the magazine to get a code for him. Again, we don't know how they're going to handle it yet, but with that said, the Green Knight could also be our first legendary hero. Basically a hero character that can't lead armies, but functions as an agent that cannot die, that's immortal like legendary lords. This would of course open the door for characters like Krell and Gotrek, and it does seem likely that at some point in the trilogy, legendary heroes will become a thing. It would just open up the door for so many characters that people want to see brought to life. He could also function like he does in the lore, where if you're outnumbered in a fight, he appears on the battlefield to aid you and then disappears. Or there could be a Brettonian fightiness kind of WoW mechanic that requires you to earn him. No idea how CA is going to handle it, but it will very likely be one of those options. So feel free to let me know how you think he'll be incorporated in the comment section below. So let's talk about how they play currently. Brettonia is one of the stronger factions in multiplayer in my opinion. Wait, what? Surely Indypride, you gotta be joking, right? Like, they don't even have their full roster yet. Well, no, I'm actually not. Some other YouTube commentators haven't really caught on and are still calling them a 2nd or even a 3rd tier faction, which I really don't agree with at all. First and foremost, the balance guy for Total War Warhammer is named Otto. He works for Creative Assembly, and he explicitly said they're purposely making Brettonian units overperform, making them somewhat OP at the moment because they don't have a full roster yet. The Beloved Son of Brettonia ability is bugged currently, so just like the High King ability for Thorgrim and the Dwarfs, your entire army of peasants is getting +8 melee attack, 12% weapon damage, which is kind of not important, 8% charge, which is not that important, but most importantly, they're getting immune to psychology for free when you bring the Beloved Son of Brettonia ability. So your entire army is getting immune to psychology, which is crazy because peasants should be routing from things that cause fear, but they really don't give a crap about it. From the start of the match, as long as Lewin doesn't take a leadership hit, so those abilities are all kind of messed up right now. They aren't functioning properly. They don't even get deactivated properly because literally if your leadership drops like 2 or 3 points, the entire ability gets deactivated. The tooltip info on them is all messed up, but basically your peasants don't fight like peasants. They fight like professional soldiers. You completely negate all incoming charge bonuses from infantry and from cavalry. They're extremely cost effective in terms of the men-at-arms units. They have the best air force in the game besides maybe the Empire. Your peasant bowmen are amazing. The focus fire damage they can do is insane. And the Lore of Heaven's buff and debuff spells are dope. So yeah, Bretonnia is really good right now. They just don't really play like Bretonnia. You don't see cavalry builds from Bretonnia right now. And frankly, Knights of the Realm should be a core unit, one that makes up maybe like a 3rd or 4th of your entire funds, but you don't really see people play like that currently. They should, like, honestly, Bretonnia should be running builds with like 5 or 6 Knights of the Realm, and right now it's just not really viable to do that. They're not a bad unit by any means, and they can do great things for you, so can Grail Knights, but they're maybe just a bit expensive, and will certainly need to get rebalanced a bit to get into a better spot. When Bretonnia is officially released, their peasants need to suck hard. They need to suck way harder than they do currently. They're just way too cost effective right now. Their cavalry needs a buff or price changes to make cavalry corps more viable, and Grail Knights definitely need their Blessing of the Lady ward save. 10% damage reduction from all incoming sources should go a long way in making them a better unit, although they probably still need a bit more than that, and I'd also be cool with them getting rebalanced into a smaller but more elite unit as opposed to a full-strength cavalry unit. I don't actually think we'll see that because Blood Knights and Chaos Knights are functioning the way they are currently. They're a full-strength cavalry unit, so I don't think that Grail Knights will become, instead of like a 45-man unit, I don't think they'll become like 20 men in a unit, but we'll see how CA decides to handle that. Now, Bretonnia fanboys will say that Grail Knights should absolutely crush, or at least decisively beat, Blood Knights and Chaos Knights. To that, I completely disagree. I think that all 3 of those units should be pretty much on par with each other. People will cite the army book as saying that Grail Knights are superhuman warriors and blah blah blah, but you can look at the same kind of descriptions in literally any army book in the game, especially for Warriors of Chaos, Chaos Knights, and Vampire Counts Blood Knights. The army books say the exact same kind of things for those units, so when you use the army book description, it's not a useful thing in a discussion, because every single army book is propaganda for a unit. They all say, this unit's the best at everything, which obviously isn't true. I think that Blood Knights, Grail Knights, and Chaos Knights should all be pretty much on par, because they're all the elite cavalry in Total War Warhammer, and maybe Grails being a bit more defensive with their ward save, Blood Knights being a bit more aggressive with Frenzy, and Chaos Knights kind of being a heavily armored blend of the two. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. And if they don't get a bonus versus large, which they probably won't, they will probably remain inferior to Blood Knights in a 1v1 fight, but of course they have the benefit of murdering ethereals with their magical attacks, so there's that. I don't want to hear about Demigryph Knights. Those are monstrous cavalry. They're not cavalry, so we don't even need to throw them into the discussion. Morn Fangs and all the other monstrous cavalry, the Skull Crushers of Khorne that come later, are a different animal entirely. As well as Demigryphs, they are a different animal. They are not regular cav. So, for Brettonia, what kind of units need to get added? Well, they aren't missing that much right now, honestly, because the 6th edition army book was pretty small. Knights Errant are the young and up-and-comers still looking to earn their stripes. They're just a weaker, cheaper version of the Knights of the Realm. They need their Questing Knights, which will be a variant with great weapons, so I'm expecting inferior charge stats for the Questing Knights as opposed to Knights of the Realm or Grail Knights, but they should be better in prolonged melee, so it'd be cool if we saw CA kind of handle them like Sword Cavalry or Katana Cavalry in Shogun 2, where they're just really good at beating up swords in prolonged melee combat, but they're much worse against enemy cav units, so that'd be kind of cool. And Grail Knights are the guys who have taken up a Grail quest on the way to becoming, or Questing Knights are guys who have taken up the Grail quest on the way to becoming Grail Knights. Grail Pilgrims with Grail Reliquae are the Brettonian versions of Flagellants. They're fanatic and they're suicidal, and they push around a dead Grail Knight on a cart, which confers upon them the blessings of the Lady. So I expect them to be somewhat mediocre in melee, but have great leadership and the 10% ward save from the blessings of the Lady. So probably function a lot like Flagellants, but maybe also like a Kurokyou stand where it will give a big leadership buff to all units in the AoE, like from Medieval 2. And finally, we have the Prophetess of the Lady, which should be a lore level caster, probably for the Lore of Life. So she'll kind of be like a light version of the Fey Enchantress. It's entirely possible we get a few Regiments of Renown, or extra surprises on top of that. Peasants will of course need their Flaming Arrow ability, and I do think we will end up seeing that because they'll be fighting against the Wood Elves a lot in the Grand Campaign, and trees are highly flammable. So the Lore of Life also focuses on regenerating units, and guess what stops regeneration? Flaming attacks. So definitely think we'll be seeing that for Brettonia when they get officially added, and it will make for a very interesting counter for Wood Elf builds, especially if you're bringing a bunch of the monstrous infantry like Dryads and the Treekin, that kind of thing. It'll be pretty awesome to see a Brettonian player bring a bunch of peasants with flaming arrows and see if they can counter it that way. Honestly, I'm kind of hoping that CA surprises us with an 8th edition army book roster for Brettonia. Like I said, I remember that 6th edition was their last army book. They didn't get a 7th or 8th edition army book, and pretty much every faction in Warhammer Fantasy that got an 8th edition army book got new additional toys to play with. So as long as CA decides to stick with the theme of Brettonia, I'll be cool with it. Like, I'm not looking for them to jump the shark here. We don't necessarily need to see entire regiments of dismounted foot knights or hippogriff knights or anything like that, although that might not be the worst thing in the world. Some people would think that's absolute blasphemy, and I understand that there are some Brettonian purists who are out there who would just say, hey, I want them to keep with their 6th edition army book. It's simple, it's effective, it's true to what Brettonia is, and I don't blame you for that. But I don't think that it would hurt for them to get a couple more units, because they will have a very small roster compared to some of the other factions in the game. If CA keeps the theme and playstyle correct for Brettonia, then I'm all for it. If they jump the shark and start adding a bunch of dismounted knights, that won't be my thing, because I don't think that having entire regiments of dismounted, heavily armored infantry is a Brettonian thing. Like, knights on horseback are the entire point of that faction. So when you start giving them heavy infantry, you're kind of doing the radius thing where you give everybody everything, and that's not necessarily my favorite style. But this is definitely going to be a hotly debated topic. There are some people that feel like Bretonnia won't be fun in siege battles and that kind of thing, that you might just need to auto-resolve a bunch of games if you only have crappy men-at-arms peasants as your infantry to deal with enemies in siege battles, because the way castles are currently laid out in Total War Warhammer, there's almost no way to use cavalry effectively, and Brettonian castles, I had been hoping before release, would be built in such a way that it would encourage the use of cavalry, have wide open spaces that would allow you to charge, that kind of thing. That is not the case, which is unfortunate, but it does mean that we're probably not, that Brettonia is probably going to have some issues dealing with siege battles. So some people will certainly want to see really heavily armored dismounted knights as a unit for Brettonia. I disagree with it, but I can't argue from a gameplay perspective that it might be an okay thing. From a Regiments of Renown perspective, this is something that CA might actually decide to add, considering the extra time they're taking. It could just be that they add some Regiments of Renown as part of the DLC package for free. That may be somewhat hopeful, but I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility either, and there are a lot of choices that CA could add. There's a whole army book supplement called the Muster of La Massantelle. My French is terrible, so it's going to always be pronounced incorrectly, my apologies, but there are a lot of cool units in that. It was basically a Brettonian army raised to fight against the undead hordes of none other than Arcane the Black. Geoffrey's Lance Knights of the Realm are a Regiment of Renown in there. Fastric Ghoulslayer Skylance Pegasus Knights are another one. There are Men-at-Arms, there's Duke Gerard. There are a lot of cool units that they could add. There's literally the entire Warhammer fantasy universe they can draw inspiration from, of course. So it, of course, remains to be seen how CA decides to handle Brettonia, if they go that extra step, adding a bunch of really cool stuff for them, or if they just go for the regular 6th edition army book. Let me know how you guys want them to handle it. I realize that it's probably going to be split around 50-50 between purists who want Brettonia to stay with the 6th edition army book and people who want them to get some extra love and attention. But definitely let me know in the comment section, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be bringing you some more content very soon. See you guys next time.